Hungary has abducted employees of the Ukrainian bank Oshad Bank. 2 armored cash-in-transit vehicles and the valuables they were transporting were also seized. This is stated in the bank's official statement.
On the 5th day of March 2026, a pair of specialized Oshad Bank cash-in-transit vehicles, accompanied by 7 dedicated members of the cash-in-transit team, were unjustifiably and unexpectedly detained in Hungary during the routine and scheduled transportation of various types of foreign currency and bank metals between Raiffeisen Bank, located in Austria, and Oshad Bank, located in Ukraine.
According to GPS data, the illegally detained Oshad Bank vehicles are currently located in the center of Budapest, near one of Hungary's law enforcement agencies. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine has made a statement regarding the incident in Hungary. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Andriy Sybiha, stated that the whereabouts of the bank employees remain unknown. According to Sybiha, what happened can be qualified as a hostage-taking and theft of funds by Hungary.
If this is the force that Mr. Orban spoke about today, then it is the force of a criminal organization. This is state terrorism and racketeering. We have already sent an official diplomatic note, demanding the immediate release of our citizens.
Sybiha reported that Ukraine will appeal to the European Union, requesting a clear definition of Hungary's illegal actions, the hostage-taking, and the robbery. Earlier, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban made a new statement regarding the Druzhba pipeline, which was damaged by Russian shelling. The controversial official, known for his pro-Russian remarks, threatened to use force to restore the transit of Russian oil. According to him, Hungary has political and financial tools to force Ukraine to resume oil transit. Prior to this, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated that he would give the armed forces the address of one person in the European Union if that person continued to block European aid to Kyiv. At that time, Zelensky did not directly name Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban.
Yaroslav Makitra, head of political programs at the research company Sociopolis, is joining our broadcast. Yaroslav, good morning.
Hello and glory to Ukraine.
Hello, I hold glory to them. Well,
as the Minister of Defense of Poland, I personally do not know or understand the reasons for the detention of the Ukrainian cash couriers. Maybe you can provide an explanation for how this can be used, as the Polish Minister of Defense says. How can Orban use such actions, like common highway robbers, for his own political purposes? What is the strategic advantage for Orban in his election campaign here?
The main reason here is Orban himself is suffering from a severe ratings deficit. In other words, things aren't going as well for him in the elections as he would like. For the first time since the year 2010, Fidesz could really face a significant and major loss. The situation there is not nearly as straightforward, because TISA is currently winning in the single-member district race. But the majority in parliament is formed through the majoritarian districts, so it's not all that straightforward. And basically, if you do the math there just a little bit, the opposition is in a better position, but still it's far from certain that Orbán won't be able to win thanks to the majoritarian districts. But the trends are looking bad for him because his ratings are falling and he is now losing even in districts where he used to win quite easily. Because right now, if you look at the Hungarian parliament, Fidesz actually holds an overwhelming majority, 2/3 in fact. That won't be the case, and there's a good chance he'll lose this election. And what does Ukraine have to do with this? Ukraine, for years, Orban has been shaping this image. It was seen first as a significant piece of the country that could be taken back and reclaimed, the controversial and ambitious so-called Greater Hungary project, a vision that this gentleman actively promotes and advocates for today. This includes parts of Slovakia and Romania. They want to revive this Greater Hungary. These plans are often shown to the public with this map. They demonstrate it and so on. This is essentially a state policy, you could even say, of Orbán's current government, but that was before the war, following the major conflict in 2002. At first, Hungary was moving armored tanks toward the border of Ukraine. They probably expected that the Russians would conduct the war differently than they are now, that they would actually manage to capture Ukraine, and that Hungary would get something out of it. When it became clear that Ukraine was resisting and would continue to resist and that this wouldn't happen, Orban began to portray Ukraine as an enemy. Why am I bringing all this up? To point out that this cascade of events that is happening now will continue to unfold. Its sole purpose is to confirm that thesis. The hypothesis that Orban is selling to his voters that Ukraine is an enemy of Hungary. From the stage when they wanted to seize Ukraine right now, they've already moved to the idea that they need to defend themselves because Ukraine will attack, and all the other nonsense that Fidesz members are spreading. Speakers. But even here, when you say this, when you push this idea away to the masses, you need some kind of facts. Well, and here's a good, well, in their opinion, a good example of how to do this, to seize a Ukrainian armored cash-in-transit vehicle. They deliberately do provocative things to demonstrate strength, to show people a certain image. Yes, it works on TV. It's about catching criminals. You can't communicate normally if you don't present them as criminals. You have to make such arrests and not care. The Hungarian government, wanted to ignore all international norms regarding this. Well, these people were innocent. In fact, they were released literally within a few days or even sooner. But this is just absurd. It can't be some kind of mafia or some suspects. People for them to be taken like that and then released almost immediately. Of course, this just shows that they simply had no legal grounds to detain Ukrainian citizens. But to demonstrate power, to show strength and so on, you can do that as part of an election campaign. It won't last much longer to conduct an investigation, to look for some facts there, myths and so on, to impose all this on the owl, as they say, to stretch the owl over the globe. Excuse me. That's why such an event takes place. And in general, overall, Ukrainian citizens probably need to be very careful. In Hungary, because there could be various provocations in order to create the image of an enemy, and by doing so, to gain something, some dividends in the elections. Although this is also a questionable move, even electorally, because we see that Orban's ratings are falling.
Yaroslav, well, overall, it's clear that this is supposed to be some kind of special operation to capture dangerous criminals, but honestly, it doesn't look like that. It all looks very strange somehow. But overall, how should the countries of the European Union react now? Should they pretend that this is just a matter between Hungary and Ukraine and that it doesn't concern them? But on the other hand, yes, the issue here is that people were being held on what grounds? There are a lot of such questions here. So how should we evaluate and carefully assess these actions right now so that this doesn't just turn into a state of unchecked and chaotic lawlessness that simply keeps snowballing and escalating?
Well, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine is making the right statements and probably taking some actions as well. I don't know what the details look like, but Ukraine is documenting that this is a violation of all possible norms. Yes, I certainly agree that for us Ukrainians, this looks very wild and completely incomprehensible. But on Hungarian television and in the Hungarian media, a slightly different picture is being presented to the public. For them, everything is simple and clear, meaning for Orban, his voters, his core electorate. They were detaining Ukrainians, mafiosi, Ukrainians who are spreading all these myths. In other words, they don't detain Russian mafiosi, and Orban has the most corrupt regime in Hungary. This is no secret to anyone, according to many studies and so on, but that's another issue. He doesn't create that kind of image. And the more proactive and persistent Ukraine is on this issue, the more it will shatter this long-standing myth once and for all. Well, of course, this will inevitably work against his interests, no matter how much he wants it, whatever kind of semi-authoritarian regime he tries to build. He hasn't built an authoritarian rule, but Hungary remains a democratic country. There is political competition, there are opposition media, there are opposition candidates. Therefore, of course, it is already being controlled. The information space, that's why any words from Ukrainians, any actions, any reaction, all reach the voters. Therefore, it's necessary not only to take some legal actions, but also to work on the informational front. Another thing is, it's very important here, I completely agree. It's very important for the European Union to respond. So far, it seems probably the circumstances are being clarified, and what the reaction will be is still unknown. The complexity of the issue here is that these are relations between banks, a commercial bank in Austria and a commercial state-owned bank in Ukraine. And there may be banking secrecy involved, as well as other various aspects where not everything can be disclosed or made public. What kind of transaction is it? Why? Where did the money come from? And that can be taken advantage of, including by, in this case, by Orban and so on. But it is very important, I agree, the reaction and assessment of European countries and European regulatory bodies, including oversight authorities. I think we will see this in the near future.
How serious could the potential interference from Moscow in Hungary's upcoming election campaign be, following the warnings issued by Peter Magyar, the prominent political opponent of Viktor Orban. At what level are the intelligence services and political strategists involved? If we take a moment to compare it to Moldova, which is obviously a former country and a republic of the Soviet Union, Moscow's significant influence there remains quite strong. But we must remember that Hungary is still not Moldova. To what extent can Moscow actually interfere in this current campaign and distort the correct, serious, and truthful numbers?
For Moscow, this is an extremely important issue. This is the main foundation, the main support. Even Slovakia doesn't come close. This is Hungary in the European Union, through which they try to influence the adoption of strategic decisions, including those regarding Ukraine. So, of course, Russia interferes, has interfered, is interfering, and will continue to interfere by any means possible. In other words, you don't need to be a fortune teller to see that. And the fact is that, let's say Moldova, on the one hand, yes, it's a post-Soviet country, but it's under significant influence from Romania. But in Moldova, if we look at the most recent elections, a pro-European candidate is in power. So, of course, the approach and technologies there were different. They were different. Here, however, in the case of Orban, it's necessary to hold on to power. He successfully managed to establish quite influential media outlets, significant centers of political influence, and so on. He has influence over a very substantial portion of the population, especially in the rural regions and so on. But they will hold on to power not only through technology, but also by using various provocations and different circumstances. They will try to hold on, and well, it's no secret that, the question is really about the surname, and that is an undeniable fact. It's enough to see when Szijjártó or Orbán comes to Moscow and strolls around the city, eating at their cafes. All these visits to restaurants, all of this is shown, and he proudly demonstrates it. Even now, there's a segment on air showing how happy he is to see Putin there, and all the rest of it. Everything here is pretty clear. There's no need to read into it further. The question is about the degree of influence. In my view, that's secondary. Russia's influence is simply inevitable. The Orban regime essentially relies on this. Look at the whole story with oil, gas, and so on. Well, that's just how it is. It's clear that this is already harming Hungary. Strategically, it's obvious that the situation is complicated. When it comes to the resumption of Russian supplies, that's practically not even on the agenda anymore at this very moment in Europe. But Orban is desperately clinging onto this gas, to this oil, as if it's his last breath. He looks as though he breathes it, without it, he would quite literally be unable to breathe, because this is corrupt money and because this is serious influence. These are essentially the significant levers of influence that Russia has, and this is what the corrupt Orban regime is fundamentally built on.
Yaroslav? To what extent can the full story regarding these fundamental human rights that have been violated now be fully understood? Turn into a case. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine is preparing lawsuits against Hungary. Let us recall that Budapest is being accused by Kiev of financial raiding by representatives of Ukraine. Here Hitiki stated that Kiev is preparing concrete legal actions and is demanding the immediate return of the funds. He emphasized that Hungary's actions are a clear violation of international law, and, I already see a certain striking parallel here with the modern Russian Federation, which we all know quite well, and which, in principle, probably no longer exists in the way it once did. There is not a single international act left that they haven't violated. So we see that. And Viktor Orban, in principle, is following the same path?
Well, essentially, yes. He needs to hold on to power at any cost. The situation is complicated. As I said at the beginning, the gap is already up to 10% among decided voters. Well, according to the general party list, and specifically in single-member districts, the overall situation is looking significantly better for him. But nevertheless, according to all forecasts, for now, a few mandates, but the losing trend is not in his favor. Of course, he will do everything possible. What international law is there, or what rules can there even be, if the question is possibly not only about his political future, but also his personal freedom? Here, everything is frankly clear. All the pro-Russian politicians who lost simply left the political arena. Where are most of them now? They are in Russia, or else they are persona non grata throughout Europe. But Orban is fully aware of exactly what is waiting for him in the future. Because if his political opponents come to power and obtain full access to all of the government's activity records, if the intelligence services start working differently, if the law enforcement system changes and so on, we will see a lot of interesting things. And not everything will be so good for Orban there. That's why, of course, he will hold on by any means possible. And these upcoming elections will undoubtedly be yet another significant challenge for the European Union, but a much more difficult one than before. Because it is one thing for pro-European candidates to successfully hold on to power in countries like Romania or Moldova, but it is quite another thing entirely to actually defeat Viktor Orban, especially with his immense political muscle and the vast experience that he has accumulated over all these many years. So the current situation is very complicated indeed, and the intense debates over votes can be quite ambiguous and unpredictable there. We might witness a very, very intense election campaign, but I repeat, despite all of Orban's reluctance, probably he had envisioned a vision for Hungary in a very different way, but it continues to be a critical country with a serious opposition and oppositional media. And there, no one will just let the elections be falsified or allow lawlessness to happen so easily, especially during the elections themselves. As for the European Union, it could have acted earlier, a year and a half, or even 2 years ago, to change the rules or find ways, like in Hungary or Slovakia, to calm things down when they block decisions of European donors and those who hold the European Union together. But as you can see, they are following the rules for the most part and waiting probably for things to change, for Hungary's government to change. Everything has come to this point. Now we see that Ukraine's 90 billion loan is connected. It is uncertain if the European Union can resolve this somehow before the elections and so on. So well, now we see this result. The question is simply that, over all these years, Orban has really built up a very serious position. A part, not all of course, but a part of English society is against Ukraine. And even if Maida comes to power, it won't be easy for him. He'll have to take this into account and somehow look for ways to calm things down a bit. We saw the conflict when the Ukrainian president spoke about the armed forces of Ukraine, about calls to Orban. We saw Maida's reaction, how he physically stood up for Orban. Well, why is that? Because it's obviously too much for Hungarian society, and Maner is afraid that this will hurt his ratings and his position. That is, when the situation is neck and neck, every word, every action is very important. And right now, the situation is such that every word and every action by representatives of the Ukrainian authorities, or even just Ukrainian speakers from Ukraine, also directly affects the elections in Hungary.
Yaroslav, this is still an important point. It is quite clear to see that, let's be honest, in the European Union they are waiting for the results of these upcoming elections with the hope that Orban will finally retire from the world of politics. And what if he doesn't? Then what exactly is going to happen? How will people treat him after everything that is happening right now?
Essentially, things will stay the same and people will treat him as they do now. He'll also have to slow down a bit because part of society will be against him, even if he somehow miraculously wins. The main question is, and this is the most important thing, that the situation could turn out in such a way that the majority of Hungarians will be against Orban. That is, it's highly probable, it is already absolutely and completely 99% certain that Madar will win on the general lists. So of course, there could be some surprises. This is politics after all. But he will win on the nationwide list. Even if the gap is now up to 10% among the extremes, it could be less or more, but most likely that's how it will turn out. Due to majoritarian districts, Orban could stay in power. He might even lead as a minority president, meaning most Hungarians oppose him. Well, Prime Minister, of course, essentially the head of state, the head of the executive branch, and in effect, the head of state. That's why when this situation arises, Orban himself will start backtracking. By the way, we've discussed this in your studio before. It's not uncommon to see during elections that even Orban sometimes makes gestures toward Ukraine, sometimes against Russia. Why is that? Because, again, a part of Hungarian society is very much in favor of Ukraine. Truly, they hate Russia. They're against Orban. It's all kind of a cocktail, the way they've stretched out the situation now. You're either for Russia or for Ukraine. You're either for Europe or for Russia. Well, I mean, it's a bit reminiscent of what we had back in the day, like in 2004, and 2010 as well, to a large extent. So these are complicated processes, and then you have to keep the whole situation under control. That's why Orban's policy will definitely soften if he wins. And it will be a bit, well, maybe not quite the kind of Madanan we expect, at least at first. I mean, we Ukrainians, things will also be complicated and not smooth at the beginning, at least. Everything needs to be balanced out. And accordingly, this strongly suggests that things like loans could finally be released and unblocked and so on. And Orban's main problem will be effectively resolved. He will stay in power. Yes, he will hinder Ukraine. He will work against it. But this approach may no longer be as harsh. And the European Union, if Orban really continues to hold on to his power, will probably then truly have to go down the difficult path of changing the decision-making rules and actively searching for new ways to bypass the veto. These are the kinds of states that essentially live off others. And the European donation here, it's important to understand that Hungary is probably the poorest country in the European Union, a country that essentially would not exist in its current form without German and French money, without money from the European Union, well, at the same time, I'm leaning in that direction. I mean, these are just the political realities.
The head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, assures that there will be no problems in providing Ukraine with a 90 billion euro loan, despite the categorical position of Hungary and Slovakia on this issue. How might they eventually find a workable solution? What specific legal mechanisms does the European Union have to allocate this significant loan, despite all the repeated attempts by leaders like Orbán and Fico to block it?
There is a 3/4 voting procedure, if I am not mistaken, in cases where the issues concern the safety and security of the European Union. Provisions of this nature do indeed exist. Tricks, maybe that's the way they'll proceed to launch them. Or perhaps individual governments will somehow provide these loans. In that case, they wouldn't be EU loans, but loans from individual countries. Well, it's difficult right now, so it needs to be explained. I'd like to hear from the European side, from the European Union bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is, well, like the bureaucracy of all bureaucracies in the world. It's a very serious community. That's why they can block anything, even things that seem impossible to block. And if they want, they can also unblock things that seem impossible to unblock using those same bureaucratic tricks. So let's wait and see what they say. But that's the question. If we're talking about the bureaucratic mechanism, a mechanism can be found. Ultimately, it's a fundamental question of political will and of a major political decision. Is the European Union truly ready to reform its internal decision-making procedures? So far, we have seen a certain step forward, a kind of prelude to readiness, let's put it that way. But there is no absolute certainty yet that they will rewrite these complex rules, which were essentially established through, if I recall correctly, a specific referendum where the people of Ireland voted against them. They voted for all of the important decisions to be made completely and strictly unanimously by the whole group, and they were firmly against adopting any other alternative formulas based on a simple majority rule instead.
This is Yaroslav Makitra, who serves as the head of political programs at the prominent research company known as Sociopolis.